Today's conversation is going to be a deep dive into how to heal from chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID. Chronic fatigue syndrome is also known as myalgic encephalomyelitis, but it often just goes by ME/CFS. And we have an amazing guest with us today, Rebecca Tolin, and I'm going to introduce her in just a minute. But I wanted to say a little bit about our film, This Might Hurt. Was premiered at the Austin Film Festival in 2019. Me and my co-filmmaker, Marion Cunningham, worked on it for about 7 years, on and off in our spare time. I wanted to make the film This Might Hurt because of a personal experience with chronic pain. When I was 22, I had arm pain that was debilitating. I had to drop out of college, and I tried opioids. I tried so many different things that didn't work. And then I was able to heal through a book I read called The Mind-Body Prescription by Dr. John Sarno. And since I finished the film, I now trained and I work as a mind-body health coach or a pain recovery coach at Mind-Body Insight. So our panelist today is Rebecca Tolin, who is a mind-body practitioner, teacher, and writer who helps people recover from chronic pain, fatigue, and post-viral syndromes like long COVID and ME/CFS. Rebecca comes to this field through her own 13-year saga of chronic fatigue syndrome. After seeing 50 clinicians, Rebecca finally recovered after discovering Dr. Schubiner's work. She has since developed the Be Your Own Medicine course, which guides people with mind-body symptoms through the steps of recovery. Rebecca recently consulted on a pilot study with Harvard Medical School, showing that long COVID patients improve significantly with a mind-body approach. She shares healing stories and science on her blog and YouTube channel. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for co-presenting the film with us to various communities across the internet and the world. I'm so delighted to have this dialogue with you today. And I just want to say to people listening, Rebecca has an amazing story, and we're going to get into that a little bit, but we're mostly going to be featuring her expertise as a teacher. And there's other ways I'm going to point to that you can find out more about her personal background. But just to give people a sense of what brings you to this work, Rebecca, can you talk about your experience personally dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome?
Absolutely. And I just want to thank you for your work, Kent, and to your co-director, Marianne Cunningham, who I know have just thrown your life into this for 7 years. Your own time, your own expense. And it's such a powerful film because it's very honest, I think, with the struggles and the successes we can experience with mind-body healing. So thank you for having me. Great to see you all, to see people all around the world. And so my experience with ME/CFS was that I went through a very traumatic event when I was abroad. And shortly after that, I caught kind of 3 really bad viruses in a row, and my entire system crashed. I had been a world traveling broadcast journalist, and I went so haywire that I literally felt like I had the flu 24/7. I couldn't sleep. I had really awful insomnia for months at a time. There was just lots of brain fog. I couldn't even remember names of close friends or family members. The exhaustion was so intense that it was hard in the early months to just even walk from, the bedroom to the bathroom. There was lots of digestive issues, hot flashes. I really could go on with the list of symptoms, very quintessential with what we see with ME/CFS and long COVID as well. And when I tried to go back to work, that was not going to happen. And I basically was driven to many doctors by my beloved mom, who started caring for me. I was mostly able to take care of myself, but I couldn't do grocery shopping and things like that much of the time. And the diagnosis came back as chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS. Kent, I'm very impressed that you can pronounce ME. We see why there's an abbreviation. There was lots of other diagnoses as well. There was fibromyalgia and Epstein-Barr syndrome, post-viral syndrome. And then over the years, as I would go to all these specialists, so from allopathic specialists like rheumatologists and neurologists to naturopaths, I got lots of other diagnoses like leaky gut syndrome and candida overgrowth and adrenal exhaustion and those kinds of things. And I'll try to tell the Reader's Digest version that I basically tried to follow a more allopathic approach in taking different supplements. For 3 years, I did not eat starch, basically, doing lots of different diets, lots of intense cleanses and enemas, intravenous antibiotics, which completely crashed my system, intravenous vitamins and all kinds of other glutathione, and none of those things worked. And I, over the years, was on federal disability, had lost my career, my ability to support myself. And I did start doing some therapy, some psychotherapy. And I started connecting that this very traumatic event, a sexual assault, happened right before the onset of symptoms. And then there was a number of losses. I lost my father, my grandmother, 2 uncles. I mean, there were so many losses. And I kind of started feeling like I need to do some work with this. And I did EMDR and other things. And I think I was getting closer to the root cause, but none of these practitioners, neither the medical doctors or the psychologists, were ever really linking this is the same thing, right? And so I was still just sort of feeling like, okay, well, I'm traumatized and I have this disease that I was told there is no cure for this. So that went on, unfortunately, for 13 years. And eventually I got to the point, Kent, where I just kind of gave up on the same thing, going to someone else to give me a healing treatment. And I actually just started doing things that brought a little bit more peace and just a sense of a little bit more calm in the moment.
13 years going through all these different testings, all these different treatments. And yeah, can you talk about the turning point of when you were able to begin recovering in full?
Yeah. So, it happened that I just kind of had this almost like a surrender where I just felt like I can't keep doing the same thing over and over. And I noticed that my own meditation practice, which I started fairly early on, and really gentle yoga and just kind of being in nature, did bring me a little peace and enjoyment. So I decided that that's just what I was going to do because I had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point. And I think that in that place, I was listening to Eckhart Tolle a lot. I couldn't listen to a lot of sounds or have much stimulation at all. I couldn't even talk to people sometimes for longer than 10 minutes without a complete crash. But Eckhart Tolle was one of the voices that I could listen to because his voice is so peaceful. And so I really was coming into this present moment, and I started writing poetry, and I signed up for an online writing class. And the reason I'm saying this is because that came through this decision that I'm just going to sort of, in some way, make the most of my life right now. I wasn't resigned to being sick forever. I was told that I would be, but I didn't really believe that deep down. But then when I took that different approach, I met this woman through the writing class, this angel of a woman named Kathy, who wasn't a practitioner in this field, and said, I'd like to tell you about Howard Schubiner and John Sarno and how I recovered from CFS. And I said, well, I can only talk on the phone for 10 minutes or I get migraines. So we set up this conversation, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours goes by. We're still on the phone. And at the end of that call, she said 4 words that completely changed my life. And she said, Rebecca, you are not sick. And I got it. Because she'd explained the science, she'd explained the psychology, the physiology, and it was the only thing that made sense. And I so believed it that I said, I'm not sick. And it was like someone gave me a get out of jail free card. And I mean, believe me, if someone said this to me earlier, I would have just slugged them, but I was at the end of my rope and I got up and I started running around the block. And I had not ran in 13 years. I mean, I was crying because I could run again. And all this energy just filled my system. And so it was an example to me of when we fully believe something in our mind, our body will respond. Now, that wasn't completely the end of the story because we have these learned neural pathways in the brain. I figured I was just healed, but I did get a lot of symptoms back. And so then I really dove into this approach, Ken. And I would say that Howard Schubner's book on Learn Your Pain was pivotal for me. I still had a lot of brain fog, so I actually couldn't read a lot. But his book is somewhat easy to digest. And he recommended a mind-body coach to me here in San Diego. And I worked with this person for 8-9 months. We did a lot of somatic tracking, some deeper emotional work. And over the better part of a year, I recovered. I felt like I could do what I wanted in the world. I will say I still had flare-ups after that. And even to this day, will occasionally get them. But they're never severe. And they don't scare me because I know what's going on. And I've continued to kind of expand, my abilities. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is an amazing story. And I've heard you tell this story in much greater detail, and all the twists and turns are compelling and interesting. And if people want to hear that, I highly recommend the Our Power is Within podcast that you did, where you told the story in greater depth. But since you are now such an accomplished teacher, I want to use the rest of our time here for you to speak about how you work as a teacher and your understandings around working with ME/CFS and long COVID and helping others. So a lot of the people in the group here today, I'm guessing, are coming with a fair amount of skepticism that the mind-body approach makes sense for them, which we welcome. We welcome the skepticism. It's a very counterintuitive idea, this thing, you're not sick, right? I mean, people who are bedridden with symptoms, debilitating fatigue, have lost their jobs. This is very serious, and it can feel sometimes almost insulting to be told, oh, you may not have a disease. You may not have a biomedical disorder. You may be able to recover through neuroplastic retraining of the brain. That's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. So I wonder if you could walk us through your understanding of the various biomedical theories for how ME/CFS works and long COVID works, and sort of orient us to how you think of those biomedical explanations now.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I realize this may sound ludicrous and insulting to some people. And it was really only because I did start to understand the science of the brain and the nervous system, and I had tried all the biomedical approaches I had been given, that I opened to this approach. And so I do want to make very clear that I don't believe, and we're not saying that you're not feeling extremely sick. And John Sarno used to talk about the fact that mind-body symptoms can be much more severe than symptoms that are caused by a pathological or structural issue. And that's also been my experience. But I will say, to answer your question, Ken, is through my journey, I was told a lot of the same things that I hear from other people with ME/CFS diagnoses or long COVID, which was that I had faulty mitochondria, that I was actually told that viruses had invaded my brain and my brain was swollen. I had latent viruses. Epstein-Barr was often implicated. And I was told I had microclots in my blood. I had inflammation. I had autoimmune responses. Actually, I did test positive for several autoimmune disorders as well, and had some auto antibodies. But again, none of those treatments worked. And so what I have come to believe and come to see through my own recovery, through literally, I could say now I've witnessed hundreds of recoveries from other people with similar diagnoses, and from scientific research that I've done, is that a lot of these things are what John Sarno originally called normal abnormalities. So Epstein-Barr syndrome was blamed on my symptoms, and I've found many studies in the scientific literature since that show that not only do over 90 or 95% of all adults have Epstein-Barr syndrome, but there's actually studies that show that when you test people who are healthy volunteers who don't have symptoms, a number of them will have very elevated titers of Epstein-Barr. So much it would even be considered mononucleosis, and they don't have symptoms. And so Dr. Schubiner really was pivotal in my recovery, because I did a training with him pretty early on, and he explained that these sort of antibodies are just protective mechanisms. They do not cause chronic fatigue syndrome. And I had to understand that to really move forward, because I was so convinced I could feel viruses swimming around in my brain. Like, that's what I was told. And I did have really bizarre brain sensations. Like, I felt like my brain was on fire and all these strange things. So, and I've also found some studies in the literature showing that, again, asymptomatic people will test high for Borrelia and other bacteria that are implicated in chronic Lyme. I was also diagnosed with chronic Lyme. And so what I have realized is that this approach works. I truly believe that these symptoms are being caused by the state of the brain and the nervous system. And when we can become more regulated, when we can calm down that danger response in the brain, which is really feeding off fear. And a lot of times that fear comes from things that we're being told by very well-intentioned people. And we can start bringing in practices to really be with the sensations that are present through this lens of safety. We can come back into balance. We can come into homeostasis.
I'm curious to hear a little more about your experience being diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease, because we see that a lot of people get that diagnosis, and there aren't many stories of people recovering from that through a mind-body perspective or through mind-body principles. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. There were two doctors that did diagnose me with chronic Lyme when they did some tests beyond the standard blood panels. And they wanted me to do long-term antibiotics. I think because I had taken so many antibiotics for urinary tract infections, and I had had so many gut issues from that, I just really wasn't willing to do it. I kind of just said, I'm not going to do that. And I did do a lot of the more natural things they recommend, different chelating agents and supplements, and I didn't see results from that. I've later heard Howard Schubiner talk about this, and I have read some of the scientific literature myself, that there just are no clinical trials that are proving long-term antibiotic use is effective for chronic Lyme. And again, I have actually found studies with these orienteers from Europe who are in the backcountry for days or weeks at a time, and a good number of them will test positive for high levels of these bacteria, and they either develop acute Lyme, which is absolutely, you want to take the antibiotics for that. And then the symptoms go away, or they don't develop symptoms. So I'm not an expert in that, but I would say, again, that was another diagnosis that I recovered from. And I think a lot of people, very understandably, are told things from a biomedical perspective, whether it's mold or Epstein-Barr. And so we're kind of trying to do battle with all these bugs, many of which actually live naturally in our body. And what's being missed, that I feel very strongly, is our entire emotional experience. And this is not to say that this is in your head or it's all emotional. It's that emotions very much cue our brain and nervous system as to whether we're safe or not safe. And all our brain really cares about is whether we're safe or not safe. And if there's a perception of threat or danger, it will do whatever it can to get our attention. And it does that through symptoms.
So if somebody, here in this audience is, pretty convinced that they have long COVID due to microclots, or they have these fatigue symptoms due to Epstein-Barr syndrome, like, how would you start to work with somebody who's like very convinced of those things? How does the mind body perspective help people shift out of a biomedical focus and a focus on the body to this other way of thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I just am very compassionate because I know what it's like to be in that system and be medicalized. And I really felt that I lost years of my life doing what I wanted to do because I was so entrenched in that system. So I get it. And that is an invaluable system when you have an allopathic issue. And obviously we need modern medicine. It's saved the lives of people that I love. But I think it is really important if you have an interest in this approach to learn the knowledge. And certainly in the class I teach, Be Your Own Medicine, I really lay out some of these studies and the knowledge for people that are more scientifically minded, and they kind of need to hear it. And that's what I needed. Also, Howard Schubiner is just a master at translating the science in layperson terms. So I follow him very carefully. And then once we learn the knowledge, it's really lowering fear of these symptoms, which the knowledge does. But then we want to work with what's being called these days as pain reprocessing therapy. Somatic tracking was an absolutely pivotal part of my recovery because I started looking at, instead of sort of focusing on the symptoms, I shifted to sensations in my body. All they were was harmless sensations. And as I focused on the sensations, sometimes they'd actually morph into emotions, and anger would come up and then they would dissipate. Other times they just stayed there and that was okay. But over time, that was really pivotal. Also, I work with people on graded exposure, which I've learned from Dr. Schubiner, but really slow graded steps moving into these activities and stimuli that give us symptoms. And we do that with different safety affirmations, maybe with soothing touch, with positive memories. I've also found weaving in different tools to regulate the nervous system has been very helpful to me and others. So different kinds of breath work where we're extending the exhale, and that just activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Humming can do the same thing. So different practices like that are really helpful. And then the emotional work is really important, I think, for a majority of people. And I think, Kent, you were going to ask about this. The way that I work with emotions is through these somatic meditations. And I believe I'm going to lead one today, really coming into the felt experience in the body, because this is where emotions live, is in the body. And so being with the sensations and allow them to be energy in motion, allow them to move through us. Expressive writing can be a very powerful tool to just basically spill our subconscious mind onto the page with abandon, saying all the things that you would never tell your therapist or your family members, and, ripping up that paper. I've actually found movement can be powerful to release and move emotion, especially mindful movement. And there's a few practices that I like. One's called Release Your Anger, which is sort of breath work combined with visualization and body movement. One thing that I did in the first year of my recovery is I asked myself every day, how am I feeling emotionally? And multiple times throughout the day, sometimes I would set an alarm, because the mind always wants to just go back to the symptoms and what's wrong physically. And these are so intense. I mean, I feel like I have the flu. There is really something the doctors haven't found. So I just kept turning that around. How do I feel emotionally? And I recommend that to my students. And I've also now woven in a lot of mindful self-compassion. I feel is just such an antidote to these hard-driving personality traits that those of us with these symptoms seem to have. With mindful self-compassion, we actually are acknowledging what's the underlying emotional experience, and we're validating it. And then we're turning it around to, what do I really need right now? And what do I need to feel safe? And then, sometimes I definitely recommend one-on-one work and different kinds of therapy if people feel they need it. It can be very supportive along with this work. And there's ISTDP, I like somatic experiencing, I like internal family systems, basically different types of therapy where you are, especially where you're focused on the body and emotions, and it's not just talk therapy.
Great. Well, since we had a conversation beforehand, and you were saying, Rebecca, that you might be willing to lead the group here today in a somatic tracking. Are you up for that?
Sure, let's do it. Yeah. So Ken, one thing I want to say beforehand is we can do somatic tracking with any sensation. And so if you have fatigue, you can definitely do somatic tracking with whatever that feels like. It may be heavy, it may be numb, it might be dull. I also had a lot of burning all through my body. So because there's a lot of other somatic tracking exercises that in the This Might Hurt videos that Kent and his co-director have done, today I wanted to focus a little bit on emotional tracking, or a meditation I call feeling emotions, because they're actually quite similar than our symptoms. And a lot of times we have a hard time getting in touch with our emotions. And that's okay. We just want to meet ourselves where we are. But I wanted to sort of give you a sense or an experience of how you can start noticing what different emotions feel like in your body. And many of you may be very in touch already with your emotions, or might not even be comfortable with this exercise. So please honor what feels right to you. I'll guide this practice for about 8 to 10 minutes, and you can follow along with me to the degree that you want, but always listen to your own body. Okay, so if you're not already in a comfortable position, I invite you to find one. Kind of let your body wiggle a little and just adjust to a position where you can remain relaxed and awake. You can let your eyes turn downward or close completely if that's relaxing. Turning inside. And you might notice your body resting on whatever is holding you. Noticing the places where your body touches the surface. Maybe that's your feet, your seat, your back. And releasing the muscles that you don't need right now. Softening the face, letting go of gripping in the jaw. Maybe letting your shoulders drop a little bit. Releasing your arms and legs. Softening the stomach. The places we grip are protecting us from feeling emotions. And that's okay. There's a purpose for that. But as we can allow relaxation, emotions can move more easily. And know that you can modulate the flow of emotions. So if they feel too intense, you can bring your attention to the back of your body, as we've just done. You could place your hands somewhere soothing over your heart or your belly. Or you might open your eyes and look at the shapes and the colors around you. And you can also breathe into the emotions, not trying to get rid of them, just being with the sensations. But let's start with physical sensations. Maybe you feel an aching or a burning or a floating feeling. There could be sharpness or dullness. Notice any physical sensations with curiosity, like you're encountering them for the very first time. You're just exploring your physical landscape and noticing any prominent physical sensations. And what emotions do these symptoms or sensations elicit in you? Tune into the way that your symptoms make you feel emotionally. You might pay special attention to the more visceral parts of your body, your face, neck, chest, stomach, and pelvis. And if you don't notice any emotions, you might think about how the symptoms impact your life, how they limit you and cause you to suffer. Now, we don't want to go into the story, but go right to the emotional sensations that arise in your body, whatever is present right now. If you're not noticing any emotion, that's perfectly normal and okay. Trying to force our emotions will only scare them away. So see if you can just accept wherever you're at and be present to any body sensations as your anchor point. And you want to choose one that feels manageable. If it starts spiking a lot of anxiety, I would let go of that one and just choose another sensation. And see how your body responds to this question. What am I feeling emotionally? What am I feeling emotionally? Watch, listen, feel. And as I name some common emotions, see if you can sense any of them in your body. So fear or anxiety often feel jittery or buzzy, almost like electricity. Just notice if there's any of that kind of nervous, jittery, buzzy energy, and you're just bringing your mind to it with this open curiosity and mindfulness, knowing it can't harm you. You're just sitting here relaxing, just noticing the sensations, letting your mind become absorbed in them. But anger or frustration can show up as a flushed face, heat in the stomach or the limbs, gripping in the throat or jaw, or an intense upward moving energy. Just allowing any of those emotions to exist inside of you. They can't hurt you. And with sadness or grief, you might notice watery eyes, heaviness, or weakness anywhere in the body. And shame or guilt may appear collapsed, hollow, a feeling of wanting to curl up and hide. If you're noticing any of these emotions, just choose one to stay with if it feels safe enough. Again, just sort of tracking that emotional energy or whatever the sensation is in your awareness. There may also be contentment or peace, which can feel steady, calm, open-hearted. There may also be joy or little tinges of it, which can feel light or expansive. You might notice several emotions or none at all. That's completely normal. But if one emotion is prominent or one sensation is prominent, just bring your attention to that, remembering you're not this emotion. It's just a passing phenomena. There's a part of you that's watching it. And just notice where it's located in your body. Is it moving or shifting? And just follow it as you would any other sensation, noticing its qualities in a felt way, hot or cold, jittery or stable, expanded or collapsed. It might be helpful to breathe into the emotion, directing your breath into the sensation. And just notice what your mind is doing. If it's busy keeping you from feeling, it's just trying to protect you. You might note thinking and return to feeling. And it could even be that your body wants to stretch or shake or move in some way. Just follow your body's wisdom. Perhaps the emotion needs to cry or let out a sigh. It might want to express some words or a sound like, oh. Just letting it happen, giving yourself permission to let the emotion make movements or sounds or just remain still. And you might even ask the emotion, what do you need? What do you need? Just like we would attend to a scared child, what do you need? And some sort of answer could come now, or it could come after this meditation. But if we keep asking with sincerity, we'll often receive messages from our body. So if there is still an emotion with you, feel free to stay with this practice. But otherwise, as you're ready, you can release focus on the emotion and bring in some self-compassion for the very real pain that you've experienced. This emotional and physical pain is real, and you might place one or both hands on your chest and breathe into your heart space. Just seeing if you can offer yourself tenderness for what you've endured, the pain you're still experiencing and what you've overcome, just as you would do for somebody you love. Knowing that you deserve this love too. And then again, just notice the surface that's holding you. As you're ready, just remembering you're supported and you're learning to support yourself in new ways. And as you're ready, you can allow your eyes to open if they're closed. And just slowly come back to the room. You might even look around the room a little bit, or if you want to continue the meditation, that's okay too. But see if you can bring some of this body awareness with you. So as you come back into this sort of virtual meeting space, see how you might keep a little bit of attention anchored in the body. And if you felt some tenderness, I recommend finding a time and space later today or tomorrow or whenever you can to kind of come back to that place and just see if you can spend a little bit of time with it. Because no matter what you believe is happening in your body or what you're told, it's really deeply cathartic and healing to honor our emotional experience in life. You know, it can give us a lot of information, a lot of energy, a lot of intuition. Believe it or not, that was an abbreviated version, Kent. But I think hopefully people got a taste of that.
Yeah, that was really great. Thank you. If anybody had a notable experience or moment, feel free to share it with the group in the chat just now. Sometimes, I've had experiences leading somatic tracking for people I'm coaching, and they've struggled to understand these ideas, and then their pain will disappear during a somatic tracking, or their fatigue will diminish by a lot. And that can really be a light bulb moment for people where they realize, like, wow, just paying attention differently can transform the symptom. Even if it's just for a moment, you start to understand, okay, this is how the mind brain can interact with symptoms and bring start to initiate healing. So thanks so much for leading that. Okay, so we had a question from the chat I want to try to ask, which is Kim says she found mind-body techniques have worked well for pain reduction, but she's been struggling to figure out how to apply it specifically for fatigue. Can you talk about, the somatic tracking that you just led, Rebecca? I know you lead it for people dealing with fatigue, and can you talk about how you do that?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you asked that, because it took me a while to connect this branch of work to fatigue and the related symptoms. And what I realized is that if mostly you actually do it in the same way. So with fatigue, somatic tracking was probably the number one tool that I felt I recovered from once I really got the knowledge. And so I would really track those sensations of heaviness and weakness. And there was a lot of parts of my body that were so dull and numb, but that's actually a sensation too. And I would just kind of bring this mindful curiosity there. And I would say over months for me, because I had been sick for a long time. They started kind of thawing, and there was just a lot more movement and aliveness. And sometimes that was discomfort, but other times it kind of dissipated and it was more comfortable. So you can apply everything that's being taught in this field to fatigue. Now, I have actually found some nuances have been helpful for me and others in terms of understanding when our body is more in freeze, or what's called a shutdown response in polyvagal theory. There is maybe numbness, dullness, depression, exhaustion, brain fog. It really helps to bring in some very gentle stimulation, because no amount of rest in the world is going to shift you out of that. Now, many times you do need to just rest, but this gentle stimulation is really important. It can be gentle movement. It can be breath work. It can be listening to music or podcasts. It can be singing or humming. It can be it could be cool water, but it can be safe ways to slowly start waking yourself up out of this freeze state. What I find with people that have pain or anxiety as presenting symptoms, that is typically indicative of a fight-flight state in the nervous system. And then we want more vigorous movement if there's a lot of energy in the body, also just very calming techniques for the mind. And so it can be helpful to go a little bit slower when there's a lot of exhaustion or fatigue, because there just is a sense in the brain and nervous system that it's sort of collapsed because it's felt so unsafe. And so we want to go slow, but we want to keep expanding our energy envelope and sort of challenge ourselves through these techniques of graded exposure, where we're taking little steps, but we do it with outcome independence or indifference to the symptoms. And Ken, I don't know if this would be a good time to lead into pacing at all.
Yes, definitely. I was going to ask you that next. Yeah. So the ME/CFS world is really familiar with this concept of pacing, and that's, often used for this population. And whereas in the mind-body treatment, we tend to emphasize what they call graded exposure. And can you differentiate those and talk about how you think about those?
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of times when people are told to pace, they're instructed not to do activities that cause symptoms. And so what our understanding is in this mind-body work is that you actually do have to do activities that cause symptoms through this lens of safety in order to retrain your brain that you can do those things and that they're safe. And so I know for me, I stayed in this tiny little ball, not being able to talk to people or go out and do activities for years. and my brain just kept receiving those inputs. So when I learned graded exposure, the difference is we are doing things that may bring on symptoms, but we already have the knowledge in place. We have some different tools and practices in place that are going to make us feel safer. And we still want to go slowly, generally, that you're taking baby steps. But I think also with pacing, we're kind of looking at it from an inside out experience rather than the outside in. A lot of people are told to pace. I'm thinking of one client and student of mine who I've done a YouTube interview with, Jenny, and she had these two young sons. And when she was told to pace, she was told, don't take more than X number of steps each day. And when she would have to take more steps because she had to go pick up her son from the floor, she became so terrified and hypervigilant, and that would cause a crash. But we believe that's happening because of the fear in the subconscious mind, not because of the number of steps. There's a perceived sense of danger. So we want to start challenging ourselves with graded exposure to the degree we can keep a sense of relative safety and confidence. Once we start feeling too much anxiety, the brain and nervous system shut down, and then it's not a corrective experience.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, seems like for a lot of people who've been dealing with these crash cycles for a long time, the fear grows and grows, and it can be a really powerful automatic system where they may not even be aware of the fear at this point because it's been going on for so long. They're just aware that they will crash if they do too much, and they're very careful. And sometimes they've been taught to really carefully track exactly how much activity they've done. And can you talk a little bit about how the mind-body world thinks about tracking and paying careful attention to the body all the time?
Yeah. Well, we really believe it creates more hypervigilance, right? And that's what I found with myself and others. I know that pacing has worked for some people, and if it works for you, great. But the people who come to me, it didn't generally work for them. And so when we're really focused on the body sensations or our activity, through a lens of fear, and what Howard Schubiner has his 5 or 6 F words, fighting, fearing, fixing, focusing, fixating, these kinds of things, we are actually keeping that danger alarm mechanism in the brain activated. And when that's activated, we'll continue to have symptoms. And so it's this stress symptom loop that goes around and around. And it's like this defeating prophecy, because then we say, oh, I do this activity and I did get a crash. So it is because of the activity, but it really is because of our either conscious or unconscious beliefs about that. So we want to start reclaiming our lives. And this was huge for me. So in that year where I was recovering, I had a lot of symptoms for these first months. They were just as bad at times as they had been all those other years. It felt like I had the flu all the time, but I started going out there and I would meet friends, or I started doing a little work, and I would get insomnia all night. But that's your point of power right then. When you get the symptoms, that you don't buy into them, you watch them with mindful awareness. You might do some of these practices we're talking about, but then you turn your mind to something more enjoyable. You turn your mind to a show or a podcast or a book or playing with your dog or whatever it is, because we just don't want to keep sending these cognitive and somatic messages that there's anything wrong with our body. And eventually, as we send messages of safety by enjoying ourselves, even in the midst of symptoms, our subconscious mind catches up to know that we are safe and okay, because you actually can't be running from the proverbial tiger, which in most cases is actually a psychological threat, and being enjoying yourself or being in this sort of state of mindfulness and peace at the same time. So we want to start cultivating that. And that's why I say the side effects of this work are all positive, because you're like finding your self-empowerment and you're starting to live life on your terms again, to the degree that you can keep a relative sense of internal safety.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that sometimes this can seem preposterous, for people, especially within the most severe part of the spectrum where they've been bedridden for many years, let's say, or they have these really severe crashes where it seems like for sure that the overstimulation of certain light or social stimulation or activity is the cause of their crash. And I'm just curious if you can speak a little more for people who are in really severe cases, like is graded exposure really right for them too?
Yeah, it definitely is, but I really like to use this safe zone model, which comes from the learning sciences, and there's these three concentric circles. And so we want to be in safety if we're feeling very symptomatic or overwhelmed. We want to do whatever makes us feel safer. And so for someone who may be in bed and has very severe symptoms, the best thing they can do is bring in resources that make them feel safer. That may be just complete silence. For me, there was just years I was just looking at the leaves on the trees, and it actually did bring me a little relief. But then our brain and nervous system can't grow and expand in that safe place. So the next concentric circle is the challenge zone. And when we challenge ourselves, this is where our brain either creates or restores healthy neural pathways. And so we want to challenge ourselves when we can. And if you're in bed or you're in the house, it might literally just be walking from one room to the other. And then when we move into that third concentric circle, which is the overwhelm zone, we want to come back to safety. We don't want to challenge ourselves in the overwhelm zone. So a lot of times people might feel really symptomatic and say, but I can't do somatic tracking, or I can't go walk outside. And that's correct. You're doing the right thing to just find whatever is more soothing until you feel more internal resources that you can challenge yourself. And that's where you're going to retrain your brain.
Let's transition to your work with patients who have long COVID. Can you talk about the overlap with ME/CFS and the study at Harvard you've been a part of?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a study conducted by Dr. Michael Donino through Harvard Medical School. It's a small pilot study. It's not randomized, but the results just came out and were published in a scientific journal, the Mayo Proceedings, which is very exciting. And now he's going to do a randomized, larger clinical trial with long COVID patients. But I want to go over the results because there were 23 people who were experiencing significant long COVID symptoms who had tested positive for a previous acute infection of COVID, but did not have any tissue damage. So they didn't have scarring in their lungs or heart. So we're talking about this subset of people. And in this 13-week program, which was called Psychophysiologic Symptom Relief Therapy, and this is based on the same premise that we're talking about. In fact, one of Dr. Schubner's books, Unlearn Your Pain, and one of Dr. Sarno's books, The Mind-Body Prescription, were textbooks in this study. And these people with long COVID who had tried lots of other things actually experienced a decrease of 60% in all their somatic symptoms. Shortness of breath actually decreased by 80% over this 13-week study. Pain interference went down 77%. So that's actually how much pain interferes with the rest of your life and your ability to do things. Brain fog decreased 67%. Anxiety over the pain lowered 74%. Pain intensity lessened 52%. Physical limitations decreased 54%. So people were really returning to their lives, to work, to exercise. Fatigue went down 44%. GI symptoms went down 50%. I mean, these are really significant results for a 13-week study, and these were measured in this clinical study. So the other thing I wanted to say is that 57% of the people strongly agreed that exercise made their symptoms worse at the beginning of the 13-week study, and only 4% or one person endorsed that statement at the end. So people were going back to eating the foods they wanted. They were working again. I remember one person that went back to jogging, and this was all in 13 weeks of this kind of mind-body intervention. So it's very promising, and we love seeing more research because that's what's going to be important to bring this into a broader medical paradigm.
That's great. Can you talk about how you incorporate emotional work with the clients you work with?
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I guess I didn't mention that, Ken. I did consult on that clinical study through Harvard, and I basically led one of the classes teaching these kinds of principles. So yeah, with emotional work, I mean, I really do that feeling emotions meditation I led you through. There's over 20 different meditations I've created that are kind of different entry points into the body to feel the energy and the emotional energy in the body. Um, Also, just that question, how do I feel emotionally? It's really a muscle we need to train to keep coming back to this again and again. Um, I'll guide clients and students through guided practices that sometimes have some dialogue, and we're really also focused on the body and the nervous system. Um, a lot of times just doing things that can regulate the nervous system can allow more safety, so then the emotions can come up and out. Breath work can also be a powerful portal into emotions. And again, I mean, in some cases, I recommend people do one-on-one therapy with a more somatic-based practitioner in addition to this mind-body foundation. I think they can be powerful together. My experience is that just doing the therapy, I didn't improve, but when I combined it with this framework, then it made a much bigger difference.
That's really helpful. Okay, we're going to turn to some audience questions. Katie asks, could you please speak to the experience of poor sleep while on this journey? I find that when I question if poor sleep is influencing my level of fatigue, I get confused on how to treat my fatigue with mind-body approaches.
Yeah. Yeah, I so feel you, Katie. I would say that insomnia was my most vexing symptom. It was the longest lasting one. It was the most frustrating. We all have one of those symptoms. Um, okay, so I would say that first of all this approach dramatically helped relieve the insomnia because that was kind of the most stubborn one for me. I actually did combine some cognitive behavioral therapy through a book called Say Goodnight to Insomnia by Greg Jacobs, who teaches that insomnia is a learned behavior. And it's also fed by a lot of the anxiety we have over bedtime and over not sleeping. So we kind of want to work by shifting our thoughts and also shifting some of our behaviors by not laying in bed when we're restless for too long and kind of getting up and into the morning sunlight. And some of those things were helpful to me. Thanks for putting that in the chat. But I would say in terms of this question, because I get this a lot, is like, how do I know whether to challenge my fatigue because it's because of insomnia? Well, both insomnia and fatigue are mind-body symptoms, as long as it's not caused by another disease process that we're not talking about today. And so generally, I would look at the circumstance. Like if you've been active all day and you would normally be tired, then you don't necessarily want to challenge the fatigue. You want to rest. But if it's happening that you're just tired all day, which is very common, and I experienced, you do want to challenge the fatigue to the degree you can feel safe. Again, in small steps, because the brain is perceiving danger. And so it's shutting down. And my sense of it is like trying to keep us safe. So we're going to be at home, we're going to be in bed. But generally, if you wouldn't normally feel tired because of the amount of exertion you've done, you want to challenge the fatigue in these small graded steps. And then as you get that pushback from your brain through your body of the heaviness, you could do the somatic tracking with that. You can do other calming exercises. You can remind yourself this is really uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. And then you kind of ease up when it gets too intense, and then you do it again. And just again and again and again. And you keep expanding that window of activity. And that is actually what trains the brain, even in the presence of symptoms. And I would say, especially in the presence of symptoms, because you're not kind of giving into it. You're not buying into it. But really important to have self-compassion. I mean, there were so many times, there's no way I could have pushed through the fatigue. And you shouldn't try to put pressure on yourself to do that in any way. You just want to do it to the extent you can feel safe with it. Yeah, great question.
Okay, another question from the audience. Amy is asking about the community aspect seem really important for people recovering in the film. And, she wanted to know if there are options for that. And I think that's a great segue for you to talk about the course that's coming up, Rebecca.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because when I was recovering, I really didn't know of community or group programs. Now there's a lot more out there. But I did crave that because I felt really alone. So that is why I created this Be Your Own Medicine course, because what I found is that I could deliver the knowledges and the practices in a very thorough, systematic way. But then there's also the power of community. And there's kind of this sense of almost like collective inspiration and support and healing that we're cheering each other on. And I do find it, for many people, it can be more powerful. So I teach this course called Be Your Own Medicine. It's a live 10-week cohort. We're registering right now. And there is a sense of community in that, in the live classes and in an online community forum. So that could be helpful. I think in terms of, now there's a lot of great, social media groups and things, but it's tricky because for me, I found social media overstimulated my nervous system. And I think what is really important is to find people who are like-minded, who have recovered or are doing things that make you feel hopeful and optimistic, and not really linger in groups that are not feeling optimistic and that are not doing things to recover and that make you feel hopeless. It's like really important to expose yourself to people who are making you feel more possibility in your life. And if you can't find those people, then you may want to forego some of the other support groups and things out there. I know it's tricky, but I think there's a lot more available now.
Yeah, and I just want to comment on that too, in terms of the healing process. The group process can be really powerful. It's not required. Some people do this work on their own and recover. Some people do it by reading a book and journaling. That's how I was able to recover. But I also found that I was able to do so much healing beyond getting rid of chronic pain. There's so much healing around anxiety and other emotional issues through the work with another person, like dyad work with a therapist or with a coach. And so in my view, there's no substitution for working with another person, because we all have so many blind spots that we can't really ever see on our own. And so if you feel moved and if you have the resources to work with another person, that's great. And I would highly recommend that. I'm curious, Rebecca, there's so many brain retraining programs online now, and some of them have some of these elements of the mind body, but most of them don't sort of have the whole picture we're talking about today. And I'm curious, like, can you kind of compare and differentiate, like, how would you say your work that you do with clients is different from something like a DNRS?
Yeah. I just want to say like some love to the people in the chat who are saying they did Be Your Own Medicine. It's been really important in their healing journey. And I love you all. I love the people who show up because they're so committed to this work. Well, what I really hear from people who have worked with me and taken my course is that, and I think this whole branch of mind body healing is some of the real differences is that we're encouraging a full range of emotions, right? So we're not just turning to so-called positive emotions when we feel a negative. I don't call them negative, but I do believe in some of these programs, they might use some of that knowledge or some of that terminology, but we don't really believe in negative emotions. Like all emotions have a purpose. All emotions have a purpose, right? And they're actually sometimes a mistaken sense of danger, but we want to actually allow and express and experience them in a safe way. One of the things too, I didn't mention in the question on emotions, Ken, is even just verbally saying, I feel angry right now. That has shown to turn down the amygdala. So we want to really do that, where I think in some of the other brain retraining programs, there's more of an emphasis on turning immediately to a happy memory. I think in some of them, there's more of a regimented 4-step process or multi-step process, saying stop to the symptoms and kind of going through certain steps. And what I teach is really this knowledge and this whole toolkit of practices And then I want you to learn the language of your nervous system, right? And to see what you need and learn to attend and attune to yourself to see what you need in the moment. Because I can teach you a formula, but that's not going to fit for everybody 100% of the time. I think I'm not alone in that in this field. I think other practitioners are doing a similar thing. And then I think, one other difference that, I alluded to maybe saying stop to the symptoms. Instead, in this approach, we're really looking at them with mindfulness. At least the way I teach it is it's like we're not telling them to stop, because what you resist persists. And when we're in this fighting our body, we're still in fight flight, and that danger alarm signal in the brain is turned on and we continue to get symptoms. So we're just kind of allowing and watching them with curiosity, and this is sending signals back to our subconscious mind that we are safe and what's happening in our body is safe and okay. I think those are some of the differences that I hear articulated most often.
Okay, awesome. Well, we've gone a little bit over time. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. We're going to wrap up now. And I just want to mention, too, that if you know anyone who is interested in potentially hosting a screening, or if you're interested in hosting a screening with a different group that you're a part of, we have staff on hand to help produce those events. We love doing screenings, so please reach out to us. You can find us at tmhfilm@gmail.com. That's tmhfilm@gmail.com. And I really recommend checking out Rebecca's website. It has an amazing amount of resources on it. Her course, all the details for her course are there. As you can see in the chat, people have wonderful things to say about our course, so I suggest checking that out. And I want to thank you all for being here. I love all the people I can see who turn your on. Hello, thanks for joining with us. Rebecca, thank you so much for all you offered today. I think it was really helpful, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It was lovely to be with you, and thank you for all you do, Kent.
Thanks. All right, have a great Saturday, everyone. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Bye.